Hey, Dr. Trash here, and today we'll explain what Tooth and Tail is.
To the summer of love.
Tooth and Tail is a $20 real-time strategy game in a pixel style where you play the command of an army of armed animals in order to defeat other animal tribes and feast them afterwards. I know this sounds really weird, but so is the story of the game. The world is civilized by animals and meat has become the main food resource, but since most of the population is starving, a civil war has begun to decide who is going to end up as food and who is allowed to live on. But although this sounds really confusing, is the gameplay the completely opposite. In randomly generated maps you build up grist mills and farms to gain food in order to build defenses and troops and ultimately to destroy the enemy grist mill to win the game. But that the game concept seems easy doesn't mean that the gameplay is. Troops separated into 3 tiers and a 4th tier for defenses like mines and turrets. Each tier has 5 troops to choose from, and while in tier 1 you can find your low quality troops like squirrels with pistols or lizard with spears, has tier 3 your elite troops like boars with flamethrowers or a fox with a sniper for example. The game has a rock paper scissors concept, so for example is the flamethrowing boar with his AoE damage extremely effective against big groups of low tier enemies, but sucks ass when he has to fight flying troops. The strategic effect is even bigger since at the beginning of each round the player has to fill up 6 slots with troops and defenses, and is the entire game then limited to these choices. This leads to different game plans and the player has to make the choice if he wants low tier troops to swarm the enemy at the beginning of the game, or if he chooses to have turrets and mines to stabilize in the early stages and waits out until he can build his elite troops to win in a grind out fight. This leads to big varieties in the gameplay and to different strategies that spice up the game a lot. Of course this also means a lot of cheese in multiplayer, but I will talk about that later. Also I should mention that each game has different added rules that lead to an even bigger variation in the gameplay. In one mission for example, heals water your troops, while in the next one troops get constantly damaged while leaving the territory. So now you know the basics of the gameplay, but let's talk about the game modes. Tooth and Tail is divided into a campaign and a multiplayer. The campaign lets you play through the story, which lasts about 8 to 10 hours depending on your playstyle, and works more like a tutorial that teaches you about the basics, the troops and the different factions. You start as a commander in Underground City and complete missions assigned by the citizens in order to progress through the story. While the story is really cool and the settings, the sound and atmosphere plus the characters creates a nice gameplay experience, other missions are a bit boring to play. Although it can be really challenging and the heroic win condition is sometimes nearly impossible to achieve, is there just not enough variety. Most of the time you just have to build up your base and destroy the enemy grist mill, and while this can be really fun at the beginning and randomly generated maps that change each time you play that mission create replayability, it still gets a bit boring after a while. Of course, in some missions you have to survive waves of enemy and sometimes you have an army to free your allies around the map, but all in all I would have liked to see more variation here. A cool feature are the interactions within the game. Nearly every animal has its own little story or narration to tell, and there even exists interactions with building and paintings. Even though I have only scratched on the surface here, I think this is a really needed feature and creates a better player experience and lets you be part of this strange and also thrilling world. Also I'm looking forward to see all the Easter eggs that are going to be found by the community. The multiplayer is divided into 3 categories: offline, unranked and ranked. In offline you can play custom games against the computer AI, or also can play with a friend on a split screen. Unfortunately I'm not sure if this is an option for the computer, but on the console you can certainly play with or against your best friends to find out who is the best. If you play against the AI, you can choose one from 6 difficulty levels that go from training dummy to ruthless, and are at the highest level extremely difficult to beat, while at the lower levels are fairly easy to defeat. You can also mix up the teams to play 2 vs 1 or 3 vs 1, but I would not suggest it because even on easy you will get dumpstered and heavily outnumbered. Okay, if you're a tryhard, just go for it. In unranked you can either play 1 vs 1 or 2 vs 2 against other players, and although the AI sometimes fills up a team, it doesn't hurt the gameplay that badly, because as I already mentioned, is the AI pretty solid and easily capable of smashing you. This mode is perfect for trying out new strats and to see how they would work out. The ranked mode is similar to Hearthstone on a ranked system, where you either win or lose a star depending on the outcome of the game, and after getting 5 stars you rank up to your new elo, so to say. The balancing in the game is okay, and if you play to your strengths you can win with nearly every comp. Personally I found out that you're better off playing a more aggressive comp rather than trying to build up only defenses. That's because the first 2 minutes often decide the game, and the player who can destroy the enemy's farms first has an enormous advantage. If you realize that that neither player can destroy the enemy base with an early game cheese, try to expand to crystals on a high ground, since having the better positioning is key to success. Also, since farms stop producing food after a certain time, make sure to expand early enough to have always a decent income of food, but never leave your buildings undefended, cause the crystal can get burned to the ground within seconds. The last thing I want to mention in the multiplayer is scouting. Always make sure to look what your opponent has built up in order to counter him. Also risk dying with your commander if you can sniff out information about your opponent's plan, cause letting your commander die has no real penalty in the game. That's it for the multiplayer, and I will come to my conclusion for the game. The gameplay is solid and easy to pick up for beginners, and even though the game is not nearly as challenging as similar games like StarCraft 2 for example, I think that there's a pretty high learning curve in the game, and you will surely need some time to get used to the troops and mechanics that this game offers the player. The atmosphere of the game is really cool, and I think that with the settings, the sound and the story behind the game, the developers really made a good job. Still, the story lacks a bit in depth, but the multiplayer surely makes up for that. All in all, if you're a fan of the strategy game genre or want to pick up a solid real-time strategy game for beginners, I can really recommend you Tooth and Tail. But if you want to buy a game for tryhards that you can invest hundreds of hours into, then Tooth and Tail is probably the wrong choice here. Even though if you're interested in the game and like the idea of armed animals fighting each other to decide who is going to end up on the other's blade as much as I do, I would give the game a chance, since with a price tag of $20 you can't go wrong. That's it for me for today. I hope I helped you out with this review on Tooth and Tail, and if you liked the video I would appreciate if you leave a like or subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.